The workshop door was ajar when I arrived, and a faint smell of oil and grease hung in the air. I hadn't expected to find Jake there alone, especially so late. My heart raced in my chest, a mixture of surprise and something else I didn't want to admit. His eyes, intense and penetrating, met mine as soon as I entered. He was leaning over the engine of a car, his firm, deft hands moving with precision. There was an aura of authority in his posture, a presence that made me uneasy. "Hi, Jake." My voice came out softer than I had intended. He looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. There was something in that look, something that spoke of secrets and temptations, something I shouldn't want, but couldn't help. The silence between us was full of unspoken meanings, and I knew at that moment that I had crossed an invisible line. "Hi," he replied, a smile dancing on his lips. "What brings you here so late?" I hesitated, struggling to find a plausible excuse. But the truth was that I knew exactly why I was there. It was as if a greater force was pushing me towards him, an attraction I couldn't control. "Just car trouble again," I lied, trying to sound casual. Jake moved closer, and I felt the tension build with every step he took. We were so close now that I could feel the heat emanating from his body, the faint smell of sweat mixed with oil. My heart was pounding, and I wondered for the 1,000th time how we had gotten to this point. How could I, married to Mike, be so attracted to another man? "Let's have a look then," he said, his voice low and husky. When our gazes met again, there was a silent promise there. Something that said this was just the beginning. I knew I was playing with fire, that every moment with Jake could be the last before everything fell apart. But at that moment, the temptation was too strong to resist. I took my car in for repairs that rainy day, unaware that my life was about to change completely. It needed an electrical overhaul, and on the recommendation of a friend, I ended up at Jake's garage. When I got there, I was greeted by him, a tall man with striking features and a gaze that seemed to see right through me. "Good morning. Can I help you?" he asked, with a slight smile on his face. I felt a shiver run up my spine. I replied, trying to keep my composure. "Yes, my car has electrical problems. Could you take a look?" As he examined the engine, I realized I couldn't take my eyes off him. His muscles moved under his tight shirt, and there was something about the way he concentrated on his work that attracted me. "I think I've found the problem," he said, approaching me with a part in his hand. "You'll need to change this here." "Sure, whatever it takes," I replied, trying to sound nonchalant, but my heart was racing. While he worked, we started chatting about trivial things like the weather and the city. The casual conversation soon became more personal. "Are you really from here?" I asked, trying to prolong the time I would spend there. "No, I moved here a few years ago," he replied, looking me straight in the eye. There was something about the way he looked at me, something that made my stomach turn. I felt an instant attraction, something I'd never experienced before, especially being married to Mike. Suddenly, I felt the accidental touch of his hand as he walked past me to pick up a tool. It was a quick touch, almost imperceptible, but enough to make my whole body react. "Sorry," he said, with a mischievous smile on his face. "I didn't mean to." "It's okay," I replied, trying to hide the blush that rose to my cheeks. But at that moment, I knew I was playing with fire. I left the garage with the car fixed and a jumble of emotions inside me. Mike was at home, oblivious to the turmoil going on in my head. Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about Jake. I started making excuses to go back to the garage. "I think my car is making a strange noise," I'd say, or, "Could you check the brakes?" Each visit was delicious torture. The furtive glances, the complicit smiles, the electricity that seemed to fill the air between us. One afternoon, while he was examining something on the hood of my car, our hands touched again, this time intentionally. "Do you feel it too?" he asked in a whisper, his face inches from mine. "Yes," I admitted, almost voiceless. And in that instant, everything changed. He pulled me behind the parked cars and, without a second thought, our lips met in a stolen kiss, full of desire and urgency. The world around us disappeared. There was just the two of us, in that forbidden moment. "We need to stop," I said, pulling away with difficulty. "I'm married, I know," he replied, his voice hoarse. "But I can't help it. You drive me crazy." I went home that night with the taste of him still on my lips and a swirl of guilt and excitement in my chest. Mike was there, waiting for me with a smile and a kiss on the forehead. "How was your day?" he asked, without suspecting a thing. "It was normal," I lied, feeling the weight of betrayal begin to form. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about the next meeting with Jake, the next touch, the next kiss. I was caught in a web of desire, and I didn't know how to get out of it. With each visit to the workshop, I felt the tension between me and Jake grow like a rope, stretched to the maximum. I couldn't find any more plausible excuses to take the car in for repair, but my need to see him overcame any sense of logic. The few words exchanged were enough to set my heart and body on fire. "Hi, Jake. The car's making that noise again," I said, knowing it was a flat-out lie. My car was in perfect condition, but the need to see him was almost a force of nature. He smiled in that way that made my knees go weak. "I'll take a look. It could be something simple," he'd reply. But his gaze said much more than his words. The furtive glances and complicit smiles became frequent. Every time I saw him, a shiver ran down my spine. I felt an electricity in the air, something I had never experienced with Mike. The desire was uncontrollable, and I knew that Jake felt the same way. On one of those days, while he was checking the engine, our gazes met for a second longer than usual. The world around us seemed to disappear, and all that remained was the unbearable tension between us. "I need to get a tool from the back car," he said, his voice hoarse with desire. I knew this was our chance, and I followed him without hesitation. Behind the parked cars, away from prying eyes, he pulled me close. "I can't stop thinking about you," he whispered, his breathing heavy. "Neither can I confessed, feeling my heartbeat accelerate. Then, without another word, he kissed me. It was a stolen kiss, full of urgency and passion. His lips on mine were all I needed at that moment. I tasted temptation, betrayal, but also the purest, most intense desire. We pulled away for a moment, both of us panting. "This is crazy," I said, trying to catch my breath and regain my sanity. "I'm married, Jake, I know," he replied, his eyes fixed on mine. "But I can't help it. I can't stop wanting you." That stolen kiss changed everything. It wasn't just a passing desire. It was something deeper, more intense. I knew I was treading on dangerous ground, but the attraction to Jake was irresistible. Every visit to the workshop became a dangerous game, a flirtation with the forbidden. I'd come home with the taste of Jake's lips still on mine, and guilt was beginning to consume me. But at the same time, I couldn't stop thinking about the next encounter, the next touch, the next kiss. I was living a duality, a double life that left me in a constant state of excitement and fear. Mike was beginning to notice that something was different. "You're in the garage a lot. Are you sure the car has that many problems?" he asked one evening while we were having dinner. "Yeah, it's been one thing after another," I lied, trying to sound casual. "But Jake's a good mechanic. I'm confident he'll sort it out." He just nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. I needed to be more careful, but I couldn't stay away from Jake. Every encounter was a step deeper into betrayal, but also into discovering a part of me that I didn't even know existed. I spent every day looking forward to the visits to the workshop, the furtive glances, and the stolen kisses. The tension between us continued to grow, and I knew it was only just beginning. I was on a path of no return, and with each encounter with Jake, the line between right and wrong became increasingly blurred. That first stolen kiss was the beginning of something I could no longer control. I was caught in a web of desire and betrayal, and every day, the tension and passion became more intense. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't stop. Jake was like an addiction, and I was completely hooked. Jake's text messages became bolder and bolder. At first, they were just questions about the car, but they quickly evolved into something more personal. One night, while Mike was sleeping next to me, my cell phone vibrated. It was a message from Jake. "I can't stop thinking about you." My heart raced, and I found myself smiling, even though I knew it was wrong. Erotic dreams about Jake began to invade my nights. I'd wake up sweating, feeling his touch, smelling his scent. It was sweet torture, knowing that he was so close, but at the same time, so far away. Looking at Mike sleeping peacefully next to me only added to the guilt. He had trusted me blindly, and I was betraying that trust unforgivably. But at the same time, I couldn't stop. Jake was like a magnet, drawing me in more and more. One afternoon, Mike asked why I was going to the workshop so much. I stammered, trying to find an excuse. "The car's still having problems, you know. These mechanics never do the job right the first time." He seemed to accept my answer, but I knew I couldn't keep lying for long. That evening, Jake sent me another message. "I want to see you again. Tomorrow after work?" I knew I should say no, but my fingers seemed to have a life of their own when I replied, "Yes, tomorrow at the workshop." The next day, I was nervous all through work. My hands were shaking and my mind was racing. When I finally arrived at the workshop, Jake was waiting for me, with that smile that made me melt. "You came," he said, pulling me into a more hidden corner. "I shouldn't be here," I whispered, but my body was already moving closer to his, as if it had a mind of its own. "But you are," he replied, and before I could think, his lips were on mine. It was a kiss full of desire, of need, and at that moment, all guilt disappeared, replaced only by a burning desire. When we pulled away, he whispered in my ear, "I can't stay away from you any longer." I knew he was right, but I also knew he was playing with fire. Every message, every touch, every stolen kiss led us deeper down a path of no return. And as the guilt grew, the desire to be with Jake grew even more, consuming me completely. That night, lying next to Mike, it all seemed like a distant dream. But when I closed my eyes, all I saw was Jake. And I knew that, whatever the consequences, I wouldn't be able to stop. The secret messages, the furtive meetings, everything was becoming a part of me. And I didn't know how to get out of that vicious cycle. The only thing I knew for sure was that I wanted more. More of Jake, more of those forbidden moments, and I was willing to risk everything for it. Jake's invitation to meet up outside the workshop came unexpectedly. I was alone at home, looking at my cell phone, when the message came through. "Do you want to meet me tonight? Somewhere of our own?" My heart leapt immediately. Even though I knew it was risky, the temptation was too strong to ignore. I took a deep breath and replied, "Yes. Where and when?" He suggested a bar far from home, a place I would never go with Mike. I dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was both discreet and provocative. When I arrived, I saw Jake leaning against the bar, sipping a drink. He was irresistible, with that dominant presence that left me breathless. The sexual tension was almost unbearable. Every time our gazes met, I felt a wave of heat run through my body. Jake moved closer, and I could smell his woody scent, which made me even more ecstatic. He smiled sideways and said, "I didn't think you'd come." "Me too," I replied, trying to keep my composure. We chatted about trivial things, but the tension was always there, an electric current that connected us. After a few drinks, he suggested something more daring. "Shall we get out of here? I know a place where we can be more comfortable." My heart was pounding in my chest, but the idea of being alone with him, with no one around, was irresistible. "Let's go," I replied, without hesitation. Jake drove me to a nearby motel. On the way, I couldn't stop thinking about what I was about to do. When we finally arrived, he took my hand and led me to the room. The door had barely closed when he pulled me into an intense kiss, full of desire. I felt my body give in to that moment, as if all my inhibitions had evaporated. "You're incredible," he murmured between kisses. "I can't stop thinking about you." Those words made me even more vulnerable and surrendered. Our bodies met with an urgency I had never felt before. Every touch, every kiss, was an explosion of sensations. The passion between us was overwhelming, and I couldn't think of anything else but the pleasure he gave me. The first night with Jake was intense, a mixture of desire, guilt, and excitement. I knew I was cheating on Mike, but at that moment, nothing else mattered. Every time Jake whispered my name, I felt more alive, more wanted than ever. When we finally lay down, exhausted, I snuggled into his arms, my heart still racing. "That was incredible," he said, stroking my hair. "Yes, it was," I replied, my voice laced with a mixture of emotions. As he fell asleep next to me, I stared at the ceiling, reflecting on what I had done. The guilt began to weigh on me, but the excitement was still there, pulsating. I knew that night would change everything, that there was no turning back. The line had been crossed, and now I was caught in a web of desire and betrayal. When I finally managed to close my eyes, I fell asleep, with the feeling that my life would never be the same. I woke up to sunlight filtering through the curtains of the small motel room. I looked over and saw Jake still asleep, his face relaxed, almost innocent, which was such a contrast to the intensity of the night before. My heart was racing, but it wasn't just from excitement. There was also a weight of regret that I couldn't ignore. I laid my head on the pillow and closed my eyes, trying to organize my thoughts. "Good morning," Jake's husky voice snapped me out of my reverie. He turned to face me, a soft smile forming on his lips. "Good morning," I replied, trying to smile back, but feeling the knot tighten even more in my stomach. How could I feel so alive and so guilty at the same time? He sat up in bed, stretching his arms and yawning. "Are you all right?" he asked, noticing my unease. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied, just thinking about how I'm going to get home without arousing suspicion. Jake laughed, but there was a hint of concern in his eyes. "You're a great actress. I'm sure you'll make it." I stood up and started to get dressed, avoiding his gaze. Every movement felt heavy, as if I were carrying the weight of the world on my shoulders. He came over and put his hands on my shoulders, turning me to face him. "Hey," he said softly. "Do you regret what happened?" I looked at him, feeling my heart squeeze. "I don't regret spending the night with you, Jake. I regret cheating on Mike." He sighed, his fingers sliding down my arm. "I understand, but we can't change what happened. We can only decide what to do from now on." "I know," I replied, pulling away a little, "but it's hard. I don't know how I'm going to face Mike when I get home." Jake nodded, understanding. "You need some time to think. I'm here for you, but it's up to you." As I finished getting dressed, my mind was racing. I knew I had to keep my composure when I got home. I couldn't let Mike see that something was different. The guilt was there, but there was also an excitement that I couldn't ignore. It was as if the adrenaline of taking risks was keeping me alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I left the motel with Jake, each of us going our separate ways. In the car, I looked in the rearview mirror and tried to pull myself together. I needed to appear normal when I got home. When I finally parked in the garage, I took a deep breath and got in. "Hi, love," said Mike, looking up from the newspaper he was reading. "How was your day?" "It was good," I replied, trying to sound natural. "Just a bit tiring." He smiled and went back to reading, without suspecting a thing. This normality made me feel even worse, but it also gave me a strange feeling of power, as if I were in control of a dangerous secret. In the days that followed, the fantasies about Jake became more frequent and intense. Every moment of solitude was filled with memories of the night we spent together and longings for the next encounter. I knew I was playing a dangerous game, but I couldn't stop. The thrill of taking risks, of living something forbidden, was addictive. One night, after Mike had fallen asleep, I found myself looking at him, feeling a mixture of guilt and desire. How could I love someone and still feel such a strong attraction to someone else? I closed my eyes and let my mind wander, imagining the next time Jake and I would meet. It was then that I realized something frightening. I was discovering a new side of myself, a side that found pleasure in taking risks, in living on the edge. It terrified me and excited me at the same time. I didn't know where it would lead, but one thing was certain: I couldn't go back. Jake's offer of a weekend out of town took me by surprise. We were in the workshop, exchanging furtive glances between the tools and the cars, when he approached, with that crooked smile that always made me lose my footing. He said quietly, so that no one else would hear, "Let's get out of here. Spend a weekend together, away from it all." My heart raced. The idea of spending more than one night with him, away from any immediate risk of us being discovered, was too tempting to ignore. But at the same time, the fear of being caught and the weight of guilt consumed me. I knew I would have to lie to Mike, and it was eating me up inside. I don't know, Jake. What if he realizes? My voice trembled, reflecting the internal battle I was fighting between reason and desire. "Trust me, it'll all work out. We deserve this," he said, holding my hand and looking deep into my eyes. And at that moment, all my doubts seemed to disappear. I wanted to believe that we really deserved that time together. That evening, at home, I began to elaborate on the lie to Mike. I said that the company had organized a training session out of town and that my presence would be indispensable. Mike believed me, as always. He trusted me blindly, and that trust made my heart grow tighter with every lie. When the day of the trip finally arrived, I felt a mixture of excitement and guilt. I met Jake at the bus station, and he greeted me with a kiss that made all my worries disappear for an instant. We took the bus to a small town, far enough away that no one would recognize us. The hotel room was simple, but it felt like paradise to us. As soon as the door closed, Jake pulled me close, and our bodies met with an urgency that seemed to have been building up for months. There were no more barriers, no more fears. There was only the now, the moment. Unbridled passion overtook us, and we gave ourselves to each other without reserve. I needed this so badly, Jake whispered in my ear as he wrapped his arms around me. I needed you, just for me. I smiled, feeling a happiness I couldn't remember feeling before. Me too, Jake. Me too. We spent the rest of the weekend immersed in each other. We strolled through the city streets, had lunch in small restaurants, but what mattered most were the moments we spent in the bedroom, away from the real world. Every touch, every kiss, every whisper seemed more intense than ever. But deep down, the fear of being discovered never completely disappeared. Every time my cell phone rang, my heart raced with the possibility that it was Mike, that he had found out everything. The messages I sent him, full of invented details about the fake training, were a constant reminder of the fine line I was walking. Last night, while Jake slept next to me, I lay awake, staring at him. The adrenaline of the risk, mixed with the passion I felt, left me in a state of constant agitation. I knew that this weekend couldn't last forever. Soon, I would have to go back to my life with Mike, pretending that nothing had happened. But for now, I allowed myself to enjoy it. I let Jake hold me, let his warmth envelop me, and I surrendered to the moment, knowing that, despite everything, I would never forget those days. When I got back into the routine, everything seemed more complicated. Several times a day, I found myself trying to pretend to be normal, but the truth was that it was exhausting. Every time I looked at Mike, I felt a weight on my chest. He was beginning to realize that something was wrong. "You look different, love. What's going on?" he asked one evening while we were having dinner. "It's nothing, Mike. Just work stressing me out," I replied, trying to sound convincing. But he narrowed his eyes, clearly suspicious. Every day, the situation became more tense. I had to come up with new excuses to escape and meet Jake. The lies piled up, and with them, my anxiety. Jake would send me messages, often at inappropriate times, and I had to be quick to delete them before Mike saw them. "Can we meet tomorrow?" Jake wrote once, and my heart raced. I wanted to see him, but I knew I was risking too much. "Yes, but I need to think of an excuse," I replied, feeling a knot in my stomach. Looking at Mike, asleep next to me in bed, I wondered how I had gotten to this point. I loved him, but the passion I felt for Jake was overwhelming. His touch, the way he looked at me, it was addictive. But guilt consumed me. Every time I lied, I felt a part of me shatter. "Are you happy?" Mike asked again, catching me off guard. "Of course I am. Why do you ask that? You seem distant. I feel like you're hiding something from me." He was right, but I couldn't admit it. Indecision was eating away at me. On the one hand, I had Mike's stability and love. On the other, the intense and uncontrollable passion with Jake. I knew I had to choose, but I couldn't. "I just need some time to myself," I said to Mike, trying to gain some space. "Maybe a weekend away to relax a bit." He reluctantly agreed, and just like that, I had another excuse to meet up with Jake. But with each new lie, the tension grew. I was playing with fire, and I knew that sooner or later, everything could fall apart. "You're playing a dangerous game," Jake said once while we were together at the motel. "I know, but I can't stop." Dating Jake became a necessity, an escape from reality. But the truth was that I was living two lives, and the line between them was becoming increasingly blurred. Mike was becoming more and more suspicious, and I knew I couldn't go on like this for long. But deep down, I didn't want to give up on Jake. The passion was too intense to ignore. I tried to convince myself that I could keep up appearances, but every time I saw Mike looking at me with that expression of doubt, I felt that he was close to finding out. And the fear of being found out was mixed with adrenaline, making every meeting with Jake even more exciting and dangerous. I decided to continue the affair with Jake, even though the guilt was eating me up inside. With each encounter, the adrenaline and desire seemed to increase. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't resist. Meetings in the workshop became more daring and risky. Once, he pulled me into a dark corner, among the tools and car parts, and kissed me with an intensity that made me forget everything around me. "You know this is crazy, don't you?" he whispered, breaking off the kiss, his eyes shining with desire. I know, but I can't stop," I replied, my voice almost a moan. The meetings were no longer limited to the workshop. Jake suggested more and more unusual places. We met in parks, shopping mall parking lots, and even in empty alleys at night. The danger of being caught only added to the excitement. That afternoon, Jake sent me an unexpected message. "Meet me at the hotel on the main avenue. Room 305. I need you now." My heart raced. I was at work, but I made up some excuse and rushed off. When I arrived at the hotel, he was already there, waiting for me. As I opened the door, he pulled me inside and kissed me with desperate urgency. "I couldn't wait any longer," he murmured against my lips. That afternoon was an explosion of passion. Every touch, every kiss, every moan seemed to engrave in my mind and body the need we felt for each other. I felt alive like never before. But in the evening, when I got home and saw Mike, the guilt came back full force. He looked at me suspiciously, but I was getting better and better at making excuses. "Work is killing me," I'd say, while my mind wandered to Jake. I dreamt about Jake almost every night. Dreams full of lust and uncontrollable desires. I'd wake up in a sweat, with my heart racing, and look at Mike, sleeping next to me, feeling overwhelming guilt. But at the same time, a part of me yearned for more. Every message from Jake gave me a burst of adrenaline. "You're mine," he'd write. And that made me feel wanted in a way I'd never experienced before. The relationship with Jake was intensifying. The meetings were becoming more frequent and intense. I felt that we were creating an emotional bond that went beyond the physical. "Do you think about me when you're with him?" Jake asked once, while we were lying in bed in a cheap motel. "Yes," I admitted, looking into his eyes. "I think about you all the time." But at the same time, I knew we were walking on dangerous ground. Every encounter was a greater risk. Every touch, every kiss, every moment of forbidden pleasure brought us closer to being discovered. On one of these dates, while we were in Jake's car, he took my hand and said, "I want more than this. I want you all to myself." My heart raced. "Jake, I don't know if I can do this," I replied, my voice trembling. "I know it's hard," he said, stroking my cheek. "But we can't go on like this forever. I need you. I need you to choose." The decision to continue the affair with Jake was leading me to a point of no return. It was becoming increasingly difficult to separate my world with Mike from the world I shared with Jake. I felt torn, but at the same time, the desire to be with Jake was irresistible. Every meeting brought us closer. I felt like I was falling in love with him, but at the same time, guilt and the fear of being found out tormented me. I was living a double life, and I knew that, eventually, I would have to face the consequences. But for now, the endless search for more moments of forbidden pleasure and strengthening the emotional bond with Jake were all that mattered. I was caught in a web of desires and emotions that seemed impossible to undo. The night was cold and dark when I arrived at the workshop to meet Jake. The sky was heavy with clouds, threatening to collapse at any moment. I was nervous, my hands sweating as I gripped the handle of my bag. Every step I took towards the workshop seemed to echo in my chest, as if my heart was beating louder than the sound of my shoes on the asphalt. When I entered, the workshop was almost deserted. Only a few lights were on, casting long, sinister shadows across the walls. Jake was there, waiting for me with that penetrating gaze that always made my heart race. He smiled when he saw me, a smile that mixed desire and a little mischief. "You came," he said, his voice low and husky. "Of course I came," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. I couldn't stay away. The tension between us was palpable. Every time our gazes met, I felt a shiver run down my spine. It was as if the world around us disappeared, leaving just the two of us in that moment filled with desire and uncertainty. I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't help it. The attraction to Jake was too strong, too irresistible. "Are you sure no one will show up?" I asked, my voice coming out shakier than I would have liked. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on mine. "Relax. I've locked the door and turned off the cameras. We're alone." His closeness made my breathing quicken, every inch closer, and I felt like I might explode with pent-up desire. He raised his hand and touched my face, the touch warm and firm, but at the same time, incredibly soft. "I've been waiting for this all day," he whispered. "You know how much I want you, don't you?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded. His touch was electrifying, and every word that came out of his mouth only fueled the fire inside me even more. He tilted his head and kissed me, a deep, urgent kiss, as if he was trying to convey everything he felt in a single gesture. My body responded instantly, and I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer. It was as if all the accumulated desire had finally found an outlet, and I gave myself completely to the moment. Every touch, every kiss was charged with an intensity I had never experienced before. But then, in the midst of all that passion, we heard the sound of an oncoming car. Panic seized me. I pulled away from Jake, my heart pounding uncontrollably. "Someone's coming," I whispered, my voice full of fear. Jake looked at the door, his face serious. "Quick, hide back here," he said, indicating an area behind a pile of tires. I ran and hid, trying to control my breathing. The sound of the car getting louder, the engine being turned off, and then footsteps. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my mouth. I knew that if we were caught, everything would be over. Mike would find out, and my life as I knew it would fall apart. Jake went to the door and peered through the window. "It's just a customer who forgot something," he said, trying to reassure me. "I'll get it over with quickly." The next few minutes seemed like an eternity. I could hear Jake talking to the customer, his voice calm and controlled, as if nothing was happening. But I knew he was just as nervous as I was. Finally, I heard the sound of the car pulling away, and Jake turned back to where I was hiding. "He's gone," he said, helping me up. "We're safe." I let out a sigh of relief, but my body was still shaking. "That was close," I said, my voice still shaking. Jake pulled me into a tight hug. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "But it was worth it to see you here, even at the risk." I looked at him, seeing the same mixture of emotions I felt. The fear of being discovered, the adrenaline of the situation, and above all, the uncontrollable desire that pulled us towards each other. "This can't go on," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. He looked me in the eye, his face serious. "I know," he replied, "but I also know that neither of us wants to stop." I stayed silent, because he was right. Desire was stronger than reason, and at that moment, I knew that despite the risks, I couldn't stay away from Jake. That night in the workshop was a turning point. We knew we were playing with fire, but the passion between us was too overwhelming to ignore. And even with all the fear and guilt, the excitement of being with him made it all worthwhile.